So Moises Caicedo has provided us with one of the most seismic sagas of any transfer window in recent memory. Let's take you inside the British record £115 million deal. So let's go right back to the start of Caicedo's Premier League career. It was only 2 years ago that Brighton paid a paltry £4 million for the tough tackling midfielder from the Ecuadorian club Independiente del Valle. But how did they get the deal done when so many others had failed? Manchester United were actually very keen to sign Caicedo, but they decided to walk away from negotiations because he had too many intermediaries blocking their path. But there was no such problem for Brighton, and it was their former sporting director and now key decision maker at Chelsea, Paul Winstanley, who managed to cut through the noise and secure the signature of a player who would become one of the most sought after in Europe. Let's fast forward to January of this year, by which time Moises Caicedo had established himself as a regular in Brighton's first team and played a starring role for Ecuador at the World Cup in Qatar. There was no surprise that there was interest in the midfielder, mainly from Arsenal, who had not one but 2 bids rejected. Caicedo went as far as going on Instagram, basically to plead with Brighton to let him leave. Caicedo was actually given a leave of absence by Brighton as Arsenal tried and failed to secure his services in that January transfer window. There was never going to be an issue between the player and his teammates. He was a very popular figure in the Brighton dressing room, and they were shrewd enough to realise that Instagram post was the work of one of his advisors and not Caicedo himself. Now this is where Tony Bloom and Paul Barber, the chief executive at Brighton, pulled off another masterstroke. Not only did they manage to keep Caicedo once the window closed, they also persuaded him to sign a new contract, and a new contract, crucially, that didn't include a release clause. Bloom and Barber gambled on the fact that Caicedo would accept the offer of a short-term pay rise. Therefore, by the time we got to the summer, they could basically name their price. In fairness to Caicedo, he didn't sulk after the Arsenal move collapsed. Far from it. He went on to play a key role in Brighton securing their highest ever top-flight finish and bringing European football to the Sussex coast for the first time in their history. Roberto De Zerbi was keen to keep Caicedo, saying to him in front of teammates after they wrapped up that top 6 finish, "Give us one more year, play in the Europa League." But the player had already had his head turned. He was really keen to move, and to move to Chelsea. Caicedo verbally agreed personal terms with Chelsea right at the start of the summer transfer window, but they just couldn't seem to agree a fee with Brighton. Numerous verbal bids were rejected because Tony Bloom and Paul Barber and David Weir, the technical director, always had a figure of at least £100 million in their mind. That resolve was only strengthened when Declan Rice swapped West Ham for Arsenal for a British record fee of £105 million. Suddenly, the Seagulls' sights were raised even more. Caicedo actually cleared his locker at Brighton's training ground a week before the deal was finalised. That was the last dramatic push to try and force his way out of the football club, but still, Tony Bloom was unbowed. He wanted his asking price met. It came as a real shock to Chelsea when their top 4 rivals Liverpool actually gazumped them and agreed a fee with Brighton of £111 million. That was late on Thursday night, but by Friday afternoon, Caicedo hadn't travelled to Merseyside for his medical, and suddenly Chelsea were not only back in the race, but they were very much the front runners. Caicedo's determination not to undergo a medical at Liverpool was because he was still desperate to join Chelsea, and he knew that the powers that be at Stamford Bridge were still negotiating through the night with Brighton to try and get a package agreed. It was only once Chelsea's co-owners, Todd Boehly and Burdad Eghbali, personally took over negotiations with Bloom and Barber that the deal really started to ramp up. Even as Brighton were playing their first Premier League game of the season against Luton last Saturday, talks were ongoing. Finally, a deal was reached late on Sunday night. Not £100 million, not the 111 Liverpool were willing to pay, £115 million, even more than Tony Bloom had hoped for at the start of the window. And the key to successful negotiation was the fact that the bulk of that money would be paid up front, and that the add-ons related to Caicedo's individual performance and team success were deemed easily achievable by Brighton. Although Chelsea will claim victory over Liverpool in the battle to sign Caicedo, Brighton are the only real winners in this deal. Their profit, more than £2.5 million per game that Caicedo played for the Seagulls in the Premier League. Tony Bloom, take a bow.